Hello guys, it's me again. And in today's video, we are going to discuss the chapter 6 from the book The Psychology of Money, written by Mr. Morgan Housel. And the name of the chapter is Tails You Win. We're going to start off with the story of Mr. Heinz Berggruen. So Berggruen basically was a German, and he fled from the Nazi Germany in the 1930s, and then he moved to America. And Heinz Berggruen wasn't very much known in his youth, but by the 1990s, he was one of the most successful art dealers in the world. And in the early 2000s, he sold his art collection to the German government for 100 million euros. And among his art collection, he had pieces from Picasso and several other known artists. And the thing is, how did he know that he has such valuable items in his collection? Was it his luck? Was it his skill? Or was it something else? So there could be a third thing, which is actually described by an investment firm called Horizon Research, and they say that when it comes to successful art investors, the common thing is they usually buy vast quantities of art, and they hold them for a long amount of time. And when you hold them for a long time, what happens is the returns that you're supposed to make from the portfolio, from the art portfolio, those returns actually converge upon the returns of a few best elements in the portfolio. So to put it in other words, 99% of all the collection that Berggruen had, only 1% actually made him really rich. And among that 1%, of course, he had the art from Picasso and other famous artists. So yeah, the point here is that the same thing actually happens in business and investments. You can invest in a lot of companies, you can invest in a lot of stocks, and there is a high chance that you might be wrong more than half of the times, but in the end, there is a high chance that you will still end up making a fortune. And to reiterate this point, we're going to look at an example of another example, which is of Walt Disney. Everybody knows Walt Disney. But the story behind the Walt Disney Company as a company is that their first studio actually went bankrupt. And the reason that they went bankrupt is they were producing cartoons that were actually really expensive to make. They had almost 400 cartoons in the early days, and most of them were really good and they were beloved by the audience. But at the same time, they were really expensive to make. But then Walt Disney had a breakthrough. They made this movie. Everybody knows about this movie. It's called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And that movie actually ended up making them $8 million in a span of 6 months. And the point here again, as we saw with Berggruen, is that out of several hundreds of minutes of cartoon animation, only 83 minutes of the Snow White actually made Walt Disney successful. And that's what actually made them as well known as they are today. So in both of these stories, the main thing here to point out is the tail events. You have a lot of things, you're investing in a lot of things, you're producing a lot of things, but if you give them enough time, there is a high chance that among that big collection of items, a few would actually um, make you make the whole endeavor successful, basically. And we will call them tail events because they are on the far end of the distribution, and they are actually accounting for most of the returns that you get from anything. So we call them tail events. Moving on, when it comes to tail events, there are a few trail-driven industries, and I think venture capital is one of those industries where they invest in a lot of companies, and it's a high risk, of course, because most of the companies do not actually turn out to be successful. To give you just an example, if a venture capital invests in 50 companies, not in 50 companies, I mean, fuck. So if a venture capital actually invests in 50 companies, and there is a high possibility that half of them will fail, 10 of them will actually do good, but 2 or 3 of them will go bonanza, and then they will make up most of the returns from the investments. But when we talk about venture capital, I mean, everybody expects that they are risky, they are unpredictable. And that is the nature of that kind of a business, right? But then if you look at the other options of investment, which most people actually consider to be like a safe bets, and those options basically include like investing in the large public companies. But you would be surprised that the tail effect also plays a part in there as well. For example, you can look at this fund which is called Russell 3000 Index, and it has been there since 1980. It has been there since 1980, and it is a collection of diversified companies from different industries, and they are like really big companies. But even in that index fund, 40% of the companies actually lost 70% of their value. But again, if you look at the overall history of that fund has actually performed really well. And the reason behind that is that out of all the companies, 7% of them actually performed really, really well. To give you an example, Amazon basically drove 6% of the S&P 500 index, and Apple also drove 7% of the growth of the index. But among even these tail companies, which are Amazon and Apple, they also have tail products. So when it comes to, for example, Amazon, they have experimented with a lot of products, like hundreds of products. But in the end, it's their Amazon Prime and their Amazon Web Services which actually account for most of the money they make. And with Apple, as we all know, it's the iPhone that makes them the most money. So even among these tail companies, as I said before, there are tail products that actually account for the success of these companies. Moving on, we have, let's see. Yeah, so the thing is, we have seen the impact of these occurrences, the tail events, that how can they impact the overall result. And the thing is, we can probably apply the same thinking when it comes to our own behaviors in investing. Like, how does the tail event actually play a part in our investment strategies. So let's say I will give an example of three people: Sue, Jim, and Tom. And let's say Sue has invested $1 per month since 1900s in the US stock market, right? All of them have invested $1 per month in the stock market. But since they have been investing since 1900s, there have been a lot of ups and downs in the stock market, right? But let's say Sue behaved in a different way. So what she did is she kept on investing $1 every month, and she didn't sell anything whenever there was a recession, or she basically kept on investing. She stayed true to her strategy. And then we have the example of Jim. So what Jim did is basically, as soon as he saw that there was a recession coming up, he would sell his stocks, and then he would keep the cash. And as soon as the recession actually went away, he would put the cash back in. And then there is Tom. And what Tom does is that he sees that the recession is going on, but he waits for a bit before he sells his stocks. And when the market is back to normal, then he waits a little bit more before he puts his money back. But if you look at the end results, there has been more than 1,000 months since 1900s, right? So if you look at the final results, you would see that Sue ends up making 3/4 more money than Jim and Tom. As I said before, that there have been thousands of months between 1900, starting from 1900 to now. But among those hundreds of months, there were a few months where there was a recession, right? And during those months, all of these three people had to make a decision, right? And if you count the percentage of those months where they had to make a decision, then that would come out to be only 22% of the time they had to make that decision. And based on that decision that they had to make in that short time, that actually impacted, or it actually accounted for whatever results they got in the end. So the point here is basically of the whole story is that whatever actions we take in a given moment, in a short amount of time, can have a big impact on the overall result. And that decision in a short amount of time, we could say, is also a tail event. And so yeah, I hope you understood what I was trying to explain, and hopefully you learned something. This is the first part of the chapter 6. There's going to be a second part coming up, and hopefully you guys will learn something from there as well. And thank you. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.